Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello and welcome to The Print. I have with me today former Foreign Secretary, veteran Ambassador Shyam Saran. He is also the former chairman of the National Security Advisory Board. Welcome to The Print, sir, and thank you for talking to us.
My pleasure.
Sir, to quickly start off, we'll first focus on the neighborhood. As you are well aware that India is having a bit of a trouble in the neighborhood. Let us start with Myanmar first. Do you think the military coup that has happened there was always sort of impending? We had a partial democracy there. What are your views on that, sir? And how do you think India should deal with it now?
Well, as you said, it was not as if the military had ceded power fully to the civilian government. There was a kind of a compromise between Aung San Suu Kyi-led National League of Democracy and the Myanmar army. And it was always a very uneasy coexistence. As you know, that the army had ensured that 25% of the seats in the parliament would be held by nominees from the armed forces, which ensured that without the army's go-ahead, there could not be any kind of constitutional amendment, which is the reason why Aung San Suu Kyi could not formally take over as the head of government. She was designated as a kind of a state councillor. Mm-hmm. So it was, as I said, always an uneasy kind of existence between the two. But I think what happened this time was that unexpectedly, from the army's point of view, the landslide victory that the NLD won under Aung San Suu Kyi came as a bit of a surprise. Because, over the last few years, Aung San Suu Kyi was perhaps losing some of her popularity within the country. Even within her party, there were, complaints that she was very autocratic and she was centralizing everything in her hands, did not handle the Rohingya issue too well. So I think there was a fear within the armed forces that with this massive majority, the momentum for further constitutional changes, for reducing the political power of the army, this would perhaps become irresistible, that it would become very difficult for the armed forces to handle. And the other aspect, of course, is that in doing this, they were conscious of the fact that they now have a much more powerful China that could perhaps, shield them. Even if there were reimposition of sanctions by the Western countries and even perhaps within the ASEAN, China would be able to provide, them support and help them deal with the international reaction. Naturally, this means, therefore, an increase in Chinese influence in Myanmar. And to that extent, that is not good news for us because, the whole periphery for us is challenged today, whether it is, Pakistan, you've seen what has been happening in Nepal, Sri Lanka, you have just had the news that the port project in which we were participating together with Japan has been cancelled. So we have a challenged neighborhood, and this will, in fact, in a sense, increase the level of that challenge.
What do you think should be our strategy now as far as Myanmar is concerned and related to other aspects of it?
It will be a difficult situation to handle, but I think it is also true that India is perhaps the only country which has maintained positive relationship both with the armed forces leadership as well as with the democratic leadership. So in a sense, you are quite well placed, to manage the situation, or should you choose to manage that situation? Because right through, we have not, let our contacts with the Myanmar military, suffer in any way or diminish in any way. I know you mentioned the sort of giving a submarine, but we have also been giving training as well as hardware.
Right.
So our equation with the armed forces is quite good. And as I said, we also have good relations with the civilian democratic forces. So perhaps if there is some, shall I say, a sense that we could play a role in trying to handle this situation, we should, because that in a sense will give the ruling regime there, dispensation there, somewhat more room for maneuver vis-a-vis China. But on balance, I would say that I anticipate that Chinese influence in Myanmar will probably increase.
That's interesting, sir. And also, when we talk about Chinese influence, there's also the Sri Lanka factor. Right now, we've seen how they have scrapped the East Coast terminal and they've offered West Coast now. India and Japan both have to take a call on this because it seems they would not go back. And then you have Nepal, where internal politics is also playing out, where again, experts are talking about a Chinese influence. So overall, if we take this three for now, sir, how do you think things will be panning out in the future, and where it's our neighborhood policy, India's neighborhood first policy, how will we be steering that?
So as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, I think we should note that this particular decision not to go ahead with Japan and India with regard to the port project is not as a result of, at least as far as we can see, as a result of any kind of Chinese intervention or Chinese role. There appears to have been quite a lot of negative reaction, popular reaction. Yeah. So perhaps we should take that aspect into account. And my own sense would be that if there is perhaps another project which is also of interest to us, there should be no reason why we should not go ahead with that. It is not necessary for us to insist that this is the only project that we would do. Sri Lanka is going through a complex kind of a situation with the return of the of Rajapaksa, and the fact that there has been over the last few years a major increase in China involvement in Sri Lanka. But my sense is that Sri Lanka is also becoming somewhat worried, somewhat anxious about its debt exposure to China that has really increased quite significantly. So they would also, in their own interest, wish to have a little more diversification of their economic relations, and I think we should be ready to respond to that. Gotabaya had mentioned very clearly that India plays the key role as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, and Sri Lanka has to be mindful of India's security concerns. So let's take him on his word. Now, as far as Nepal is concerned, again, you have seen that there has been a lot of turmoil in domestic politics. And for us also, this is a bit of a dilemma, because we do not quite know how this will play out. There is still an impasse between the Prachanda and Madhav Nepal faction and Oli. And it is not clear whether the elections actually will be held in April, as has been promised. What I find worrying in Nepal is, number one, that there seems to be a sort of upsurge of what seems like a pro-monarchy sentiment.
Yes.
You may have seen that there were fairly large-scale demonstrations in Kathmandu in favor of bringing back the monarchy, and in favor of once again declaring Nepal as a Hindu state. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that would be a step backwards. As far as the China factor is concerned, that is also something we should watch carefully, because I felt that something that we missed perhaps during this latest set of political developments is that the Chinese, when they try to intervene, they sent a party delegation.
Yes.
They sent a delegation from the Communist Party liaison department, as if they were dealing with a country which was part of the communist family. So if they wanted to, in some sense, engage with the Nepali government, then there should be a state-to-state kind of engagement.
Right.
This is the first time we have seen that very explicitly China has somehow tried to project that the relationship is between party to party. And that's not a good sign either, because it would mean that this relationship with Nepal is somewhat different from the normal state-to-state relations that China has with other countries. So this is also something that we should watch. What is the Chinese game plan as far as Nepal is concerned? Nepal certainly has no leg to stand on as far as the territorial issue is concerned. There was a issue with respect to Kalapani, about 35 square kilometers of territory around the Kalapani springs, which we acknowledged and said we should try and resolve this through negotiations. But for Nepal to have unilaterally expanded its claim to a fairly large chunk of Indian territory of nearly 450 square kilometers, this is simply not acceptable. So I think while we have not let that stand in the way of our engaging with Nepal, but I do not think that India should be prepared to have negotiations relating to this larger claim. In the China-Nepal border agreement that was concluded in 1960, the starting point of the Nepal-China border at its western extremity was precisely, just a few kilometers east of the Lipulekh Pass.
Yes.
So even in that official agreement, Nepal acknowledged that this was the starting point.
Do you think our approach towards Bangladesh needs a revisit, or you think we are doing good there?
Well, I think the government did recognize that the relationship, which was a great success story, in a sense, of Indian foreign policy and India's neighborhood strategy, that it was under strain. And it was under strain because of certain domestic factors in India itself. You mentioned the CAA. Now, I think the government has taken since then, taken some important steps to try and assuage the negative sentiments that had been generated in Bangladesh. You have seen that the government itself is going slow somewhat on the CAA issue. So this is not as sort of prominent an issue domestically as it was in the past. It is somewhat muted. So to that extent, it is not having a negative influence in Bangladesh. But I would say that for a variety of reasons, the relationship with Bangladesh is very important. And this is one country which has been also somewhat cautious in dealing with China. If you look at Sri Lanka as a contrast, I think Bangladesh has been far more cautious, far more aware of the pitfalls there can be in terms of a high debt exposure to China. So that's we should not expect that Bangladesh will sort of cut off its relations with China, or will not want to benefit from some investment that comes from China. But I think there is a certain balance that the Sheikh Hasina regime has maintained, and that is good for us.
Sir, and finally coming to Pakistan. And also, of course, it is linked now with Afghanistan, the peace deal. But before that, with this acquittal of, the accused in the Daniel Pearl case, they have an FATF thing, the grey listing or the blacklisting hanging on their head. And there are several other issues. The fact that India has completely stopped talking to them. They keep raking the Kashmir issue. Where do you think things stand right now? And going forward, should this be our permanent strategy with Pakistan?
My sense always has been that, like it or not, Pakistan is a part of South Asia. And if India wishes to make certain that South Asia is peaceful, is prosperous, because only if that happens would India have the opportunity to play a larger and more effective role in the larger region of Asia and as far as the global stage is concerned. If you have a South Asia which is at war with itself, if there are tensions in the relations between India and other South Asian countries, there are crises which are breaking out, which always keep drawing us back to the region, then it is difficult to see how we can play a larger role in Asia and the world. So it is to India's advantage, difficult as it may appear to be at this point of time, in terms of the relationship with Pakistan, we should not foreclose the possibility of engaging with Pakistan. I do not foresee that we will have a kind of a grand reconciliation or the re-establishment of friendly relations. But I think we both need to manage what is essentially, yes, an adversarial relationship. Manage it in a manner that it does not sort of erupt into armed conflict between the two countries, because it is neither in the interest of Pakistan nor in the interest of India. Terrorism is certainly a major issue. And as you pointed out, the fact that somebody like this Khalid Sheikh can go free and go free because the state apparatus itself did not present the case properly, that there were very many technical flaws in the case that was made out, it would appear to suggest that there is not much seriousness in really trying to disassociate with these terrorist elements. The idea seems to be do enough to fend off pressures from the United States, to fend off this blacklisting under the FATF, as you say, but not really make a change on the ground. But my point is that this is something which is, in fact, undermining Pakistan itself. It is not that India is doing anything. It is Pakistan itself which is undermining its own, its reputation worldwide is at the lowest ebb possible. And these kind of incidents only makes that image even more negative. So there is not really much that we have to do. I think Pakistan is doing enough by itself to sort of undermine its position. But we should not, again, I would say we should not foreclose the possibility of engaging with Pakistan, even if there are issues that divide us from Pakistan. Let us address those issues in some kind of a dialogue with Pakistan, rather than to have nothing to do with that country altogether. To my mind, it does not really suit our interests. We have always been talking about the challenge of a two-front war, and that we may face a hostile adversary both on the China border as well as the Pakistan border. We have come to that situation. So just as a professional, I would say that it is not a good thing to allow a live and hostile border both in the West as well as in the North. We should try and see how we can perhaps change that situation. And in changing that situation, if there is some possibility of re-engaging with Pakistan without giving up any of our interest, without giving up any of our demands, I think we should not foreclose that possibility.
Mhm. Sir, and finally coming to China, you are much more aware on whatever is happening. There have been several rounds of discussion, yet no signs of disengagement.
Now, as far as the border itself is concerned, um, I have time and again said that this is a challenge we have to deal with ourselves.
Okay.
Nobody is going to come and fight your battles for you, whether it is with respect to Pakistan or whether it is respect to China. Yes, certainly it would be worthwhile for us to get support, say from the United States, in terms of defense hardware, sophisticated weaponry, also in terms of maybe intelligence sharing. But our effort should be, over a period of time, our effort should be that we should be able to deploy sufficient capabilities on our borders that makes any kind of provocative action by the other side a risky and costly affair for the other side. That they should not look at making the kind of provocations that China has as a kind of low risk, low cost affair. So to that extent, the Indian response, which has been quite a substantial response in terms of the number of troops that we have put in the field, the kind of capabilities that we have deployed, perhaps China may not have expected that kind of a reaction. They may have thought that maybe this will also be somewhat low risk kind of an operation. It has proved not to be such an operation. And I think we should also see that if you compare the Chinese rhetoric when Doklam happened in 2017, there were People's Daily editorial warning India that there might be another lesson coming your way. It was very offensive in tone, very kind of attacking in tone. When I compare the rhetoric with respect to the current impasse over Ladakh, we find that in comparison, the response seems to be much more muted. I think they should realize that other aspects of the relationship will be affected. How can it not be affected? So it is almost like expressing what their I think objective would have been. That while they can do this, India would not find it in its interest to really undermine the very dynamic economic and trade relationship with China. But that has not been borne out. So I don't think China always gets it right. As far as the external aspect is concerned, the fact that India is going ahead with the consolidation of the Quad and the Indo-Pacific strategy, that whatever China may have tried to do by this to warn us against strengthening our relationship with the United States or with other major powers in the region, it has not worked. So at the end of the day, what have you gained as China? If I was sitting in Beijing, I would not see much gain for myself, whether with respect to the border issue or with respect to the economic relationship, or even with respect to the larger Asian regional situation. So whether this kind of assessment on my side is correct, I don't know. But if it is, then perhaps over a period of time, we might see a certain change in attitude on the part of the Chinese.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ambassador. It was wonderful talking to you on all these issues.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.